Hi BookTube, it's Amy. I'm here for another Friday Reads. I have two books on the go this week. One of them is The Diaries of Virginia Woolf, and the other is a biography of Louisa May Alcott and also of her father. I also have two other books that I'm going to show you in this video today that I picked up at a little free library this morning. So I'm currently reading Eden's Outcasts by John Madison. I picked this up because I had read earlier this month The Life Letters, a biography of Louisa May Alcott that I had picked up at a book fair. And I quite enjoyed that, wanted to read more about Louisa May Alcott and more of her works. Someone kindly pointed out to me that a couple of booktubers are doing a read-along of many of Louisa May Alcott's books in the coming year, and they're kicking things off in November with this book. And I believe that read-along is hosted by Kate Howe and Megan Hunnett. Those are two channels that I had been aware of, but I don't watch on a regular basis. Perhaps I will, now that I'm going to be reading along with this book and probably reading more Louisa May Alcott in the new year. So this one is sort of a unique biography. It's a dual biography of Louisa May Alcott, who of course is the author of Little Women, and her father, who was a well-known educational theorist of the time, and he was sort of semi-famous before she was ever known. And then I guess they really came to the peak of their fame within their own lives around the same time. And it's quite interesting as well because they actually shared a birthday. She was born on her father's birthday, and then I knew this before from reading the previous biography, but they actually died on the same day within hours of each other, which is quite tragic, but also kind of symbolic of the closeness of their relationship. So I'm about 100 pages in so far, and it is really quite an interesting biography because her father, who he went by a different name from his own. He went by Bronson, but I think his first name was actually Amos. But he went by Bronson most of his life, Bronson Alcott, and he tried and failed many times to sustain a school, to run a schoolhouse. And where I'm at, about 117 pages in, I've come across two passages that I sort of bookmarked here that I wanted to share. One is on page 72. Bronson Alcott was very interested in education, and as such, he did some what I would characterize as odd things. He tried to keep sort of a day-by-day journal of the lives of his first two daughters from infancy. Sort of did, it's not as terrible as it sounds, but he sort of did tests on them to test his educational theories. He wanted to raise them in a certain way. And there's this passage in here where a story from their childhood is recounted. So Madison writes here, while Bronson and Abba admonished their girls to resist every selfish worldly impulse, they encouraged them to indulge every creative and intellectual one. Even as she entered adulthood, their later-born daughter May, who showed artistic talent, would be allowed to draw on her bedroom walls. However, mere bodily appetites were rigorously checked. When Louisa was not 3, Bronson decided to reenact the fall of man in the children's nursery. Humbly taking upon himself the role of God, he placed an apple atop his daughter's wardrobe and explained that the fruit belonged to him. After prompting them to agree that it was wrong for little girls to take things from their fathers or mothers, he left the room. When he came back, he found that Anna and Louisa had acted perfectly. Their unsuspected roles as Adam and Eve, only the core of the apple remained. Louisa, Anna reported, had gotten to the apple first. I told her she must not, said Anna, But she did, and then we eat some of it. Anna repented. Louisa seemed less sorry. The next day, Bronson left Louisa alone in the nursery with a second forbidden fruit. Abba watched unseen as Louisa picked up the object of her desire and put it down several times, saying, "No, no, father's, me not take father's apple. Naughty, naughty." Finally, she lost the struggle. Asked to explain the presence of another apple core, she explained, "Me could not help it. Me must have it." So that's kind of a funny and cute story. I have to question though, did that really happen exactly as Bronson supposedly said it did, or was that a little bit of authorial embellishment there in that story? Because Bronson, I guess, was known to embellish some of the dialogues of his students that he transcribed from his schools to make a certain point, and one of his books eventually did get him into a little bit of trouble because of what he chose to publish. People took it, I guess, the wrong way. Then we have here on page 90 a second passage I'd like to share. And this one is quite on a different level. So Bronson Alcott made some very interesting friends, some very literary friends. His friends are far more well known than he is today. And that's, well, maybe I won't spoil it for you if you don't know. I'll just read this passage on page 90. So this is when Louisa is a young girl still. Louisa's life was already assuming the contours that were to characterize it for the next 25 years or more, an almost impossibly dissonant combination of superior intellectual opportunities and frightfully worldly deprivation. A typical day for Louisa began with a trip to Emerson's house, and might continue with a nature walk with Thoreau, only to end with a homeward trudge to a cottage, where there was sometimes insufficient food, where the father wore the mantle of a social outcast, and where the mother tried to bear up under the weight of mounting debts and disappointments. Louisa's life was in one sense lavishly wealthy, in another it was perilously poor. So yeah, as a young girl, she had the privilege of spending time with and essentially being educated in her formative years by interactions with the American author Ralph Waldo Emerson and the American author Thoreau. So that's quite significant in her young life. And I'm looking forward to reading on with this. So in addition to that, I guess I'm in a literary mood, but I picked up this volume of Virginia Woolf's diaries. Now, it's not her complete diaries. It appears to be a library discard. I picked this up for $1 somewhere. But it is, I guess, what the editor Leonard Woolf, who was, of course, related to Virginia Woolf, felt were the most notable extracts, the ones that related to her own writing and to what she was reading at the time. And for me, reading the journals of authors, I'm most interested in what they themselves were reading. So for instance, on my lunch break today, I read how she was tackling Proust and James Joyce and several other just hefty and ambitious works at the same time. She's talking about Shelley here, and at this point I've read up to 1923. It's interesting because as I've been reading here, I've noticed, at least at this point that I've gotten to, she sort of has this pattern where she begins to write something. She gets an idea and thinks, this is the most unique, best idea I've ever had. It's going to blow people away. This is going to be the best thing I've ever written. Then she starts to write, and she starts to doubt herself and begins to question, do I know what I'm doing? Is this any good? Am I going down the right path? Has someone already done this elsewhere? But she pushes through, and then she begins to think, this isn't bad. I think I did a decent job. I'm rather proud of this. Then she submits it to her publisher, worries about what her publisher is going to think. And then it goes off for publication, and she starts to dread that publication date and begins to think, she begins to write things like, people are going to think I'm a sentimental woman. People are going to think I'm no good. This is going to be embarrassing. I can't stand this. And then it gets published, and she kind of breathes a sigh of relief and says, whew, I was worried over nothing. Everything is perfectly fine, and people rather like this. And that seems to be a trend so far, I've noticed, with the things that she's talked about publishing in these entries. And I'm quite enjoying, as I said, hearing about everything that she is reading and has read. In many diaries and journals that I've read, reading about their influences, what they've read, what they thought of their contemporaries is, for me, one of the most delightful things. So I'll continue on with this. Now, as I was saying at the beginning of this video, I stopped by a little free library this morning. So I was taking a couple volumes of Trollope, my volume of Mary Barton, over to this little free library, and I saw a couple of books in there. So I thought I would leave a few and take a few, as you do. So these looked quite fetching from within the little free library. And they're not real leather, they only look leather, sort of faux leather. They're, paper and cardboard and whatnot. We have here from 1969, they're both from 1969, John Milton's Paradise Lost and Other Poems. And these are something called the International Collectors Library, which I had never heard of. Sort of fancy here. And I haven't read Paradise Lost since undergrad English. I think it was like English 200A or 200B that I had to read Paradise Lost. Early English literature was probably 200A. They've got a nice ribbon bookmark in them, and overall it doesn't seem like a bad addition here. It's got an introduction by someone called Richard Erbhart. And the font is actually pretty decent to look at. So overall it seems like a fairly nice addition, and it was free, so you really can't go wrong with free. Oh, we have in here a little flyer. This volume comes to you in Marie Antoinette binding, it says on the back of this book they're offering. Yeah, so that's an interesting one. And then I grabbed the second volume, not because I'd heard of it, but because it matched, and it seemed like a crime to leave the matching volume behind. And this is John Brown's Body by Stephen Vincent Bennett. I've never heard of this title. It's got a bad chip or scratch on the front there. Just from flipping in it, it seems to be about the American Civil War. In the introduction, I just flipped through the introduction. The author is talking, the author is someone else. Nope, not the author, Bruce Canton. The introduction is by Bruce Canton. Bruce Canton is describing how people approach him asking for a definitive book on the Civil War that will explain everything to them and that they won't find boring, that will give them a good overview. And I guess the idea is that he's saying, this will give you a good overview. And it's interesting because I look at it and it appears to be poetry, like one big long poem about, I guess, the Civil War. So that'll be interesting. If you've heard of this one, John Brown's Body, be sure to let me know in the comments below. Let me know what you've been reading this past week and what you plan to read, and I hope that you have a lovely weekend.